On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Ryan Hartman in the top 5 in goals this past season. What will he do in 2024-2025? We know this. Going to be living life on the edge.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at the 2024-2025 season preview for Ryan Hartman. We'll recap his 2023-2024 season and look at what could be his most ideal role for this Minnesota Wild team. My name is Seth Toupal, credentialed Wild media member and host of Locked On Wild for the last 4 seasons and 3 years, and happy to be with you here on a Wednesday edition of the show. Before we dive in, want to invite you to tonight's live show. Yes, we got a live episode for you coming up tonight at 8 p.m. Denny has some thoughts that you are not going to want to miss, so make sure to check that out. 8 p.m. tonight on YouTube. We look forward to seeing you this evening. So Ryan Hartman, this past season, was in the top 5 for the Minnesota Wild in terms of goals scored. But he also was in the top 5 in a few other categories as well. All told, Hartman finished the season with 21 goals, 24 assists, 45 total points, and was a +4. 72 penalty minutes. We'll get into that here in a little bit. As far as even strength goes, 16 even strength goals. He had 5 power play goals, 3 game winners for Hartman throughout the course of the season. He took 173 shots, which if we look at where that ranked, Hartman was tied for 4th with Matt Zuccarello in terms of shots on goal. He shot 12.1%. And if you look at Hartman's numbers, the last 3 seasons, since the offense really has started to kind of take off for Hartman, he has shot 10.1% or better each of those seasons. And if you look at last year to this year, so in 2022-2023, Hartman played in 59 games, had 15 goals, 22 assists. He was injured in a fight and came back later on in the season. He also spent part of the year, spent a couple games on the bench due to a high number of penalty minutes, but increased his shots from 149 2 seasons ago to 173 last year, increased goals, assists, points, cut his penalty minutes down in more games. He had 18 fewer penalty minutes in 15 more games. He played 16 minutes, 31 seconds per night on average, and had a 47% face-off winning percentage, which was the most that he's had in a full season as center, which I consider the last 4 seasons. Really the switch to more of a primary center. There were seasons in which, in much more limited face-off attempts, Hartman had a higher face-off winning percentage. But since he started really mixing in as a center, this is the highest his face-off percentage has been in those instances. He had 65 blocks this year, which was a career high. 75 hits was the most he's had, second, third, fourth most he's had in a season. And there are a handful of other metrics that can really help tell the story as well. Hartman's Corsi for percentage was 53%, so above 50% where you want to be. And the other one that I like to look at statistically is point shares. Now, what point shares mean is it's the number of points that a player in particular contributes to the lineup. And so if you look at Ryan Hartman's contributions, Hartman this past year had 4.5 point shares, 3 point shares offensively, 1.5 defensively, 4.5 total. If we look at where that stacks up on the Minnesota Wild roster, Hartman clocks in at 9, ninth on the team with 4.5. So Hartman by himself, if you take Ryan Hartman out of the equation, the Minnesota Wild would have been 4.5 points worse in the standings than they were this season. Just for context, Kirill Kaprizov leads the way for the Minnesota Wild with 11.4 point shares this past season. So if you take him out of the lineup, that's 11 points in the standings. That feels pretty right. But Hartman top 10 in that category. As I mentioned, he's second on the team, or he was second on the team in faceoff wins this past season. And we, at this point, we know kind of what Ryan Hartman brings to the table and what he excels at. And that's where the living on the edge comes in from the open. Is Hartman is a guy that plays with a lot of intensity, a lot of fire, and he walks that line on seemingly a nightly basis. And sometimes it gets him into trouble where you end up committing retaliatory type penalties. There have been instances in the past. I mean, look at what happened last year where he threw his stick on the ice, nearly decapitated Matt Boldy trying to get it in the direction of the officials. Although, as was said, that wasn't the intent, but it came after a penalty call that frustrated the Minnesota Wild. Hartman threw his stick on the ice. He ended up getting a penalty for that. And so you see some of that. You see the frustration side of things where you're taking retaliatory penalties. If you get roughed up by somebody behind the boards, instead of taking the 2-minute penalty, maybe you throw some fists, and then all of a sudden it's offsetting penalties as opposed to the Wild going on the power play. You see some of that, but the point that I'm going to make here is that I would rather have somebody who runs hot and occasionally boils over as opposed to having somebody who runs cold all the time. And you really have to try to get them to, boil over, so to speak, because there are a lot of players on this Minnesota Wild team, it seems like, that run more cold. And so having those guys that are going to be able to, feed off of that frustrated energy. Like, think about the Jordan Binnington game where he nearly fought Marc-Andre Fleury. Ryan Hartman played a key role in that game. He played a key role in getting under Jordan Binnington's skin and allowing the Wild the opportunity to just send him to the cleaners to the tune of 5 goals allowed. Players like that are key pieces of teams all across the NHL level. The key is to harness it and to not let that get the best of you more often than not. And over the last couple of seasons, 2 years ago in particular, where Hartman committed, I think it was, he had something like 4 penalties in a 2-game span and ended up going to the bench. It understood that, you can't let frustration get the best of you, because then it ends up hurting the team. And I don't have the statistics. I tried to find them. I don't have the statistics in terms of conversion rate per penalty, but it seems like Hartman's is the highest other than maybe Jake Middleton for this past season. And so I think the frustration comes in because it seems like every time a particular player goes to the penalty box, in Hartman's case, it seems like the other team scores every time they get those chances. And so that's where it goes from bad to worse. And so as we'll talk about, with some of the things, some of the expectations for Hartman for this upcoming season, penalty minutes will factor in for sure. But the reality of the situation is he is somebody who this team needs, considering the makeup of their bottom six. Ryan Hartman is still somebody that shoots the puck. He still lets it rip. And the fact that he was one of just 5 players on this team to get to the 20-goal plateau this past season reinforces that. And so there's this balancing act with Ryan Hartman in that if he can avoid the retaliatory penalties, live on that edge, but stay on the right side of the fence and not get over too many times, that's where then you start to really maximize the particular value for the player. And so that's kind of a look at Hartman's season in a nutshell. He provided needed scoring, but at the end of the day, really nothing that anybody did was enough this past season. But Hartman is an important piece. The question just is going to be, where can he be most maximized on this roster? And so we'll take a look at the ideal fit for Ryan Hartman, where he should be slotted in on this team. I've got some statistics to back it up. And so we'll take a look at that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. We are in college football season, and with Major League Baseball heading into the stretch run, it's a perfect opportunity to go see your favorite team in action, whether they are playing one of their most feared rivals, most hated rivals, or just getting the season underway, as in the case of the NFL. Game Time has a ton of features to be able to help you find the best tickets around. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through discount tickets. You can find super deals and zone deals, plus the tickets actually go down in price the closer you get to the event. That's another one of the Game Time perks. So head to Game Time to take advantage today. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure to check out Locked on NHL to get the full lowdown as we continue to move towards the start of the regular season. Locked on NHL has you covered with all of the biggest news stories for all of your favorite teams and regarding all of your favorite players, your team every day. Reminder as well, we got a live show coming up for you tonight at 8. Denny has some thoughts. You are not going to want to miss this. So make sure to tune in 8 p.m. on YouTube for another live edition of Locked on Wild. So continuing our conversation with Ryan Hartman, where does he fit? What do we expect? What do we need from Ryan Hartman? We'll go to more of the expectations for this upcoming season to finish off the show. But you look at some of Ryan Hartman's best fits from this past season and where he did his most damage. So I want to go to some statistics courtesy of Money Puck to reinforce the importance of Hartman this past season. And, why he continues to be of those contract extensions that were handed out, he still is one of the ones that I have the least issues with. It just comes down to the penalties thing. Shots on goal per 60 minutes for the Minnesota Wild this past season. Ryan Hartman was fourth on the team with 8.49 per 60 minutes. Shot attempts per goal, or shot attempts per 60 minutes this past season. Ryan Hartman was third on the team with 16.94 attempts per 60 minutes. So let's just look at this right off the bat too. Is that Hartman is getting just about 17 shot attempts per 60 minutes and is getting roughly half of those to the net so that they're registered as actual shots on goal. Matt Boldy, on the other hand, and we talked about Boldy last week. We will give him a full season preview as well. We'll give every player on the roster and those fighting for roster spots season previews here this year. Matt Boldy registered 21.45 shot attempts per 60 minutes. That translated to 9.6 shots per shots on goal. So that's under 50%. Kirill Kaprizov at 21.5 shot attempts per 60 minutes. He got 10.2 shots on goal per 60 minutes. So those two operating under 50%, but you want them to be the ones taking the shots. You want those two to be the ones taking a lion's share of the shots. And with players like Matt Zuccarello, who last year, there were a lot of shot attempts that it seemed like he passed up. You want players like Ryan Hartman, like Joel Eriksson Ek. You want those to be the guys that are taking a majority of the shots. If we look at these shots on goal per 60 minutes for the entire team, players like Freddie Gaudreau was at 6.7. Marcus Johansson somehow at 5.42. Marcus Foligno at 4.22. Like, you want your offensive pieces to be the ones getting a majority of the shots. Marco Rossi was at 7.3 shots on goal per 60 minutes last year. And so having Hartman at 8.49, that's where that should be, which means that, Hartman has a unique role on this team because we've seen it in the past. We saw 3 seasons ago, we saw him and Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello all line up and put together what was a pretty darn good top line for this Minnesota Wild team. But, it may not be, we've talked about whether or not it makes sense to go back to that this season, because the overall arcing thought is that if you have Kirill, Matt Boldy, and Joel Eriksson Ek as your top line, where's the rest of the scoring going to come from? It's a legitimate concern. And so the prevailing thought has been, let's take a couple of those pieces and try to spread evenly the top 6 so that you have the opportunity to have 2 lines that can score at minimum for this Minnesota Wild team. But here's the problem. If we look at that reunited combination for this past season, Kaprizov, Hartman, and Zuccarello, their expected goals percentage was under 50%. It was at 48.6. And their expected goals against was actually higher than their expected goals for per 60 minutes. Now, the interesting thing here, this combination didn't get a ton of time together. And while I would rather get the opportunity to see the likes of Riley Heights or Liam Ogren slot in and to get some comfort level with Marco Rossi, your expected goals percentage leader with a minimum of 50 minutes played on the ice together was actually Zuccarello, Rossi, and Hartman at 65.9%. Their expected goals for per 60 minutes was 2.52, which isn't great. It's 2.52 it's okay, but you want to be more towards 3. But the expected goals against per 60 minutes actually led the team at 1.31. Now that's a minimum of 50 minutes, which isn't a ton of playing time but 1.31 goals against per 60 minutes was tops amongst all the qualified line combinations. And the expected goals percentage of 65.9 also led the team. Now, some of the other combinations that Hartman was involved with, Marcus Johansson, Marco Rossi, and Ryan Hartman, a 41.6 expected goals percentage. So that's a big no. Johansson, Hartman, and Zuccarello at 39.1. So that's a big NO as well. And then, I forgot about this, and we'll talk about this as well, kind of to finish the show. Hartman got injured right around the time that John Hines took over for the Minnesota Wild this past season. And so he started on the fourth line with Brandon Duhaime and Connor Dewar. That combo had a 42.9 expected goals percentage, so that's not great either. But Hartman then worked his way back up into the lineup. And so, Hartman's role on this team, I think, is probably best as a third line winger at this point because, and let's not just say winger, because if you have, say, Marat Huznadinov as your third-line center, Hartman will still get some draws depending on the situation. But I think where Hartman can really help this team is by adding scoring touch to that bottom six. Now, when injuries arise, Hartman is certainly capable, and the fact that he had such a good sample size with Zuccarello and Rossi is intriguing. Hartman is like your utility knife guy, where if you need somebody to fill in a pinch for a few games up top, he can do that. If you need somebody to fill in on the second line, he can do that. But I think his best suited role on this team is somebody that can provide some pop on the third line with, say, Marcus Foligno. Here are the numbers for Marcus Foligno and Ryan Hartman from this past season. They played 157 minutes of ice time together in all situations. They had a 54.67 Corsi 4 percentage and an expected goals percentage of or goals for percentage of 61.54. They outscored their opponents 8-5 in those situations. They had the edge in high danger chances at 26-23. And they also had the edge in high danger goals, because that's the other thing too on the Ryan Hartman front. He was one of the top players on this team in high danger shot attempts. He had 28 unblocked high danger shot attempts this season, which was third on the team, just ahead of Matt Boldy. And his numbers closer in, his high danger expected goals were fourth on the team. His numbers further out dropped off. And so get him closer to the net, the offensive numbers increase, which is that's how it works for a lot of different people. But, this is, I think, something that I want to see more from this Minnesota Wild team this year is to make crashing the net a priority. Get to the net, get down there, and just pepper away. And so the fact that Hartman can help with that is a good thing as well. His Corsi 4 percentage of 53% was 8th on the team, and that was behind the likes of Joel Eriksson-Ek, Marcus Johansson, again, somehow, Declan Chisholm, Marco Rossi, Matt Zuccarello, Kirill Kaprizov, and Matt Boldy. So, ideal role for me, third liner, but utility fill-in, higher in the lineup if you need, depending on the situation too. Like power play-wise, I think because he's a shooter, I think it makes sense to have him on the second power play with some of the other options. Marco Rossi, love to see Liam Ogren on there too. I think he makes sense as a second-line power play guy. And as far as penalty kill goes, Hartman averaged about a minute of shorthanded time this past season. So you can throw him in the mix for some of that penalty kill time, but you're going to see Joel Eriksson-Ek, you're going to see Yakov Trenin, I think 100%. Foligno will probably factor into that. Who's Nadinov, Matt Boldy. And so honestly, I think it would be good to, as I talked about with Foligno's episode, be good to see some rotation. So you're not locked into the same guys. Maybe if somebody's having a really good defensive night, give them the opportunity to say, okay, go kill us a penalty. Options as opposed to getting locked into one thing. Very good. So that's kind of where I envision Hartman being in the lineup. Now, as far as expectations go for this upcoming season, we'll talk about penalties. We'll talk about the offense. We'll talk about the whole kit and caboodle as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild, talking some expectations for Ryan Hartman after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder tonight, we got a live show for you, 8 p.m. Denny's got some thoughts you are not going to want to miss. So 8 p.m. on YouTube, we will take the air live and hang out and have a good time on your Wednesday night. Also a reminder, we have the Locked On Wild sweepstakes going on right now. We are at 2,799 subscribers on YouTube, trying to get to 3,000 by opening day. All you have to do to enter for your chance to win 2 tickets to see the Minnesota Wild take on the Columbus Blue Jackets on opening night, October 10th. All you have to do is send us a screenshot that you are subscribed on YouTube with your name to lockedonwild@gmail.com, and you're entered. We've got almost 40 entries right now. And so if you want to get in on that potential to win 2 tickets and to probably meet me as well, send us a snapshot proving you are subscribed. Add your name to it as well, and we'll get you in, and we'll draw the winner when we get to the early part of October, probably the week before the first game, so that everybody has time to get everything situated. But full contest details can be found in the description of today's episode. So, projections for Ryan Hartman for this upcoming season. I want to read what ESPN... Now, ESPN is... They're hit or miss, but it's starting to get to fantasy hockey time. And so I'm going to read the blurb here for what Hartman they're expecting, the outlook for 2025. Hartman was better last season than 2 years ago, but still couldn't produce anywhere near the level of his breakout 2021-2022 campaign. He finished with 21 goals and 45 points in 74 games. He added 173 shots on goal and a career-high 10 power play points. Hartman has displayed the ability to move up in the lineup should injuries strike, but he's more of a middle six, second power play unit guy. Sounds accurate if everyone is healthy. Hartman might be worthy of a look on the waiver wire at some point during the season, depending on Minnesota's injury situation, but he can be ignored in most formats on draft day. Standard, because, and the key thing to remember with fantasy hockey is that you're drafting from the entirety of the NHL roster landscape. And so when they say that they would avoid a player like Ryan Hartman, who has 20 goal upside, it's just because if you're in like a standard 10-team league, you've got 30 goal upside that doesn't even get drafted. So it's not to say that Hartman is not a good player. It's just that in fantasy formats, the people at ESPN and other networks view other things, view players higher for fantasy projection. Hartman's 2025 projections, 72 games played, 22 goals, 30 assists, 52 points, and a +9 on the season. Now a huge jump in penalty minutes. They have Hartman projected 94 penalty minutes, 8 power play points, and 184 shots on goal for Hartman this season. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with the durability, the games played. And let's just reestablish the hierarchy once again. Because Hartman's last injury, or one of them, was due to a fight against Chicago. Now, he did sustain another injury throughout the season too, but the main one was the fight. Ryan Hartman slots in probably second on the team in terms of willingness to fight. Marcus Foligno is number one. He's the one unquestioned that's going to step up and fight if needed. Ryan Hartman is probably number two, although Jake Middleton, Zach Bogosian, all willing to get it going as well. And so there's a little bit of worry there on the injury front. But Hartman has been, with the exception of 2 seasons ago, he's been pretty durable throughout the last handful of years since he came to Minnesota. So outside of that, he plays a very physical style. So I think there's just always worry from an injury standpoint. I think there's always worry with those types of players that, you go for a hit, maybe miss, and hit a sensitive area or something. So the injury worry is just going to be there for all these guys that play more of a physical style. The thing for me is I just would love to see Hartman avoid 90 penalty minutes for the third time in the last 4 seasons. He had 72 this past year. And, again, take out the fighting, because a lot of times you're sending somebody to the box with you. The area that Hartman can improve or can cut down is the retaliatory penalties, where you end up getting, shoved from behind and you turn around, you throw a punch, and then all of a sudden a power play goes to 4-on-4 for 2 minutes. If he can cut down on those, then I think for the most part, the others don't hurt you as much. Now, there are obviously, as with everybody, there are some that you look at and you say, just don't do that. But the thing that's interesting here is if we remember back to the end of the season press conference, John Hines singled Hartman out in particular, somebody that he thought he could get a little bit more from. And what I think Hines is talking about is I think he sees exactly what we're pointing out here, is that Hartman can be a valuable asset to this team because he has shown that he does not, he's not somebody that's going to hesitate to shoot. And this Wild team needs players like that up and down the lineup. And so if he can provide 184 shots in the third line, lock that in right now. I will take that I'll take that 10 times out of 10 every day of the week. And so if John Hines can get a little more from Hartman in that regard, that ends up being a player that you look and you say, geez, 25 goals for $4 million, we'll take that. So my expectations for Hartman this year is let's just try to keep some of those retaliatory penalties out. And as far as over-unders go for the season, I'm going to put Hartman's over-under for games at 70. And I feel like if you can play 72 or above as an NHL player, I'm more towards 75 as kind of okay, you didn't have anything that really hurt you. You just missed games here and there just for general wear and tear. So I'm going to put the over-under for games for Hartman at 70, but that's not the number that I'm focused on with Hartman this year. I'm focused on the goals. And I'm putting the over-under for Hartman at 20 goals. And I think he will best it because I think we're going to see I think we're going to see a little more balance to the lineup this year. And if that third line has Marcus Foligno on it, has Ryan Hartman on it, or even if it has, if it has Trennan on it, or if it has somebody else, not Foligno in that spot, but then you have Murat Huznadinov as the third line center, or if you move things around a little bit, I feel like some of the line mates that Hartman was with last year, especially lower in the lineup, just weren't cutting it. And I think there will be better options this year. I don't envision a scenario in which this team gets injured as much as they did last year. Watch that end up being wrong, and then I'll fall on the sword for jinxing it. But I think the opportunities are going to be there, and as long as Hartman just continues to shoot at the pace that he has been, if he gets 180 shots and shoots even 11%, what does the calculator tell us for 184 shots times 11%? That's 20 goals right there. Now, if he gets 184 shots times 12%, that's 22 goals. So I feel like the math is pretty simple for Hartman. And hopefully that second power play unit is a little better this year, to where maybe they don't have to rely on that top option as much or all the time. I just feel like the math for Hartman to get to 20 is pretty simple. And so that's why I'm picking the over for him for this upcoming season. What do you think about Ryan Hartman's 2024-2025 season? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Less than 20 goals? Let us know in the comments how you feel about what we can expect from Ryan Hartman this upcoming season. We'll see what we get for reaction throughout social media as well. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, make sure to join us tonight at 8 p.m. for another live episode. Denny has told me he's got some thoughts, and you're not going to want to miss them. So make sure to join us at 8 tonight, and make sure to hit the like button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Make sure to subscribe so that we can get to 3,000 subscribers by opening day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.